Who's actually going to get the most out of a 14-inch mobile workstation? Who can safely walk away? And does the price make sense for a regular office day user? If you're still on the fence about the HP ZBook Firefly G10, you're probably weighing the promise of a pro-level laptop against the fear of paying premium for features you'll never tap. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's walk through the kind of day this machine is built for. Imagine you're a freelance architect who spends most of the morning sketching concepts on a cloud-based CAD program, then switches to a client video call, and later needs to render a quick 3D preview before lunch. That workflow demands a CPU that can juggle multiple threads without choking, enough RAM to keep large models resident, and storage fast enough to load those files in seconds. The Firefly G10 slots a 13th Gen i7-1370P and 32 GB of DDR5 into a 14-inch chassis, which means you'll see the kind of multitasking fluidity that feels more like a desktop than a traditional thin and light laptop. Now, what about the everyday office worker who mostly handles email, spreadsheets, and occasional PowerPoint decks? For that user, the same powerhouse is overkill. The laptop's price lands it in a bracket where you could instead buy a high-end Ultrabook with a slightly smaller RAM kit and still get snappy performance for everyday apps. In other words, if your day never stretches beyond web browsing and document editing, you'll likely be paying for horsepower you'll never need. One of the practical strengths of this ZBook is the 1TB PCIe SSD. In real terms, that translates to boot times under 10 seconds and near-instant file transfers, even when you're moving multi-gigabyte CAD files or high-resolution video footage. I've seen users with similar configurations complain about having to manage external drives just to keep their main drive from filling up. The 1TB capacity gives you a comfortable safety net for most professional portfolios. The anti-glare 19201-200 display also does the heavy lifting in bright office environments. You won't be squinting under fluorescent lights, and the extra vertical pixels give you a bit more breathing room for stacked tool palettes in design software. The trade-off shows up when you look at the chassis and battery life. The Firefly G10 is definitely portable, about 3.5 pounds, and thin enough to slip into a standard backpack, but the emphasis on performance means the battery drains faster than a typical consumer notebook. In testing, a full day of mixed workload rendering, a medium-sized model, a couple of Zoom calls, and some spreadsheet crunching still left about 30% charge by the evening, which is decent. However, push the rendering load higher or crank the screen brightness for color-critical work, and you'll find yourself reaching for the charger before you hit the office. Heat management is another hidden aspect. The i7-1370P can sustain higher clock speeds, but under sustained load the bottom of the laptop can get noticeably warm. The fans kick in with a subtle whir that doesn't become a distraction in a quiet meeting room, but if you're planning to use the machine on your lap for extended periods, a cooling pad adds a bit of comfort. It's not a flaw that derails the experience, just something to be aware of if you value a completely silent workspace. Software-wise, the inclusion of Windows 11 Pro is a genuine plus for business users. The Pro Edition gives you BitLocker encryption, remote desktop, and group policy support, which can be essential if you're managing devices for a small team or need to comply with corporate security standards. For freelancers who don't need those features, the Pro license is essentially a bonus you might not use, but it doesn't cost extra in this configuration. Let's talk about who should actually press buy. If you're a professional who regularly runs resource-intensive applications, think engineers, video editors, 3D artists, or data scientists, this laptop hits the sweet spot where portability meets workstation-grade performance. The combination of a modern 13th Gen processor, ample DDR5 memory, and a fast SSD means you can keep multiple demanding apps open without the lag you'd see on a mid-range laptop. The anti-glare screen also helps when you're moving between office, co-working space, and on-site client meetings, because the extra vertical resolution gives you more real estate for toolbars and timelines. Conversely, if your daily routine is dominated by web browsing, email, and the occasional document, you might look at a more budget-friendly alternative. The same price point could land you a laptop with a longer battery, lighter chassis, and perhaps an even brighter display, without sacrificing the performance you actually need. In those cases, the The Firefly's overkill label becomes a reason to skip rather than a selling point. A subtle but important consideration is future-proofing. The ZBook platform tends to have better support for professional drivers and firmware updates, which can extend the useful life of the hardware by a few years beyond consumer laptops. If you anticipate your workload growing, maybe you'll start handling 4K video or more complex simulations. The extra headroom in CPU and RAM can delay the point where you need to.